I've got a strong visual imagination, but I could never in my mind keep all those spatial dynamics in my head unless we had a tool. For instance, we were under the war rig, we were on top of the war rig, in front of the back, and we were in the airspace around it. And you could imagine the shots, but to see how the one shot flowed into the next, you could do it, but you couldn't hold the whole sequence in your head. And then as you're putting together in a way that's readable, then you can say, then you see the opportunity for something else.
Hello, and welcome back to The Director's Cut, brought to you by the Directors Guild of America. In this episode, the backstory of renegade warrior Furiosa is explored in director George Miller's sci-fi action epic, Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga. The prequel to Mad Max Fury Road tells the origin story of Furiosa, who was snatched from her idyllic birth home at a young age and enslaved by the warlord Dementus. But when Dementus encounters opposing warlord Immortan Joe, Furiosa straddles the line of freedom and fury as the two tyrants clash for dominance over the wasteland. In addition to Furiosa, Miller's other directorial credits include the Mad Max anthology of films, The Witches of Eastwick, Lorenzo's Oil, and 3,000 Years of Longing. Following a screening of the film at the DGA Theater in Los Angeles, Miller spoke with director Edgar Wright about filming Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga. Listen on for their spoiler-filled conversation.
Wasn't that fantastic? Well, okay, so listen. In trailers when they say, from the visionary director of, or from the twisted mind of, and usually it's always slightly overblown or annoying. But here's one man I think it fully applies to. He's been blowing us all away for 45 years since the first Mad Max in 1979, and now here with the fifth film in the saga. Please be upstanding for Dr. George Miller. I said nice things.
Yeah, good.
I think probably the first question we'll get to at the end is on everybody's lips is, how the hell do you make a film like that? But we'll come to that. Before we start that, maybe you can tell us, we actually have like a connection with this film that relates to the leading lady. So maybe you can tell that story.
Well, when we decided to make this film, I had no idea who could play Furiosa, given that whoever was to play it had big shoes to fill. And I was in London. And you showed me the first cut, an early cut of Last Night in Soho, and I sat and watched the movie. It was just at the beginning of COVID. 2000?
It was just before the lockdown. It was like 2 nights before they locked down the UK.
Yeah. And we, and I was watching the film, and I was really caught up in the film. And then Anya appeared, and there was something very compelling about her. And I don't remember exactly when I said it. We went out to dinner.
In an empty restaurant.
What was it?
In an empty pre-pandemic restaurant.
Yeah, that's right. And we both had sniffles.
Yes. And I think we both thought we had it.
Yeah. And I said something like, my memory of it was this. I said, Anya, she'd be great for, and you didn't know what I was talking about or what film. And before I finished the sentence, you said, do it. She can do anything. She's got it all. That's my memory of it. And you were so confident about it, and because we've known each other, I thought, okay, that's it. I trusted you. I've heard that from other directors in the past, really fine directors, but you never quite can get the truth sometimes. But you were so confident. You didn't even know what I was talking about. and I was really, and so she actually did some sort of take for us. We talked about it. She read the screenplay, and then we went through this preparation. And about 2 weeks into the shoot, I went up to her and I said, "For me, you're Furiosa. You're no longer Anya," and you were absolutely right. It's subsequently I learned why you were so confident that she could do everything. She's, I can go on for. And I was, and each as the film went on, and the material was coming in, she was doing such a great work. I'd say thanks, Edgar, in my mind. Yeah.
I remember the day afterwards, I texted her and said, "You may get a text from George Miller." I did, and she was like, "What?" So. This is the second time I've seen it tonight, and something when I saw it the first time when I was just in a screening with you, I was really struck by how the ending sort of comes full circle with the first Mad Max in a way, in terms of the word, like a very creative revenge. And I was just wondering, before we get into Furiosa, obviously like Mad Max came out 45 years ago in 1979. Apart from the obvious, what are the most vivid differences between making this film and making your first film?
Oh, huge, actually. Mad Max was a bewilderment to me. I didn't know at the time that things that in making any film is like. I thought if you prepared the hell out of a movie, that the rest was just a smooth execution. And I wasn't prepared for all things going wrong, and I actually, even though the film was successful, I actually didn't think I was cut out for filmmaking. So I've certainly made more difficult films, like the second one, which was as a result of doing the things that I'm talking about, Road Warrior or Mad Max 2. That was made. As a result of all the things that I discovered from making the first film. And that was much more arduous, but it wasn't nearly as panicked. And I'd say by the time, all this time later, that we did this film, I'd learnt, first of all, I worked with really fine cast and crew. But I've learnt that after that first Mad Max, I don't want to give long answers, but after that first Mad Max, I remember talking to Peter Weir, who'd done 2 features, and I said, "Gee, I'm not cut out to do this." He said, "Why?" And I explained why. Nothing went the way it should. It was like walking a big dog, and I wanted to go this way, and it dragged me off this way, and he said, "But George, it's always like that." And he used this analogy about Vietnam. It's just the end of the Vietnam War. He says, "It's like being on patrol with your platoon, and you don't know where the landmines are, you don't know where the snipers are, but you've got to finish the mission, and you've got to be agile enough to adjust to any circumstance and still get the result." And I've carried that ever since. And as we know, it can get quite crazy, and it's really interesting then how to triage problems so you can actually find your way through and often come up with really good solutions to that. It's taken me all these years to even understand that, and so whatever happened on this film, whether COVID and just the rigor of doing heavy stunts and whatever happened, it felt much more comfortable. Even those moments when it got unpredictable. That's the big difference across all those years.
Well, before we talk about Furiosa, I mean, one thing about doing the Road Warrior and Mad Max 2, given that you had a tough experience on the first one, the leap of ambition between the first and the second one in terms of the style and the world is huge. So just talk about I think what's amazing about that film is it's so much more idiosyncratic, and the style of it kind of remains into this film. So what gave you the kind of sort of the courage to sort of go that much bigger with the second one?
Well, look, the first one was very low budget. The initial story was to be set in contemporary Melbourne about a cop whose family were same story, and we were to do that. And then we realised we couldn't afford to block off streets. We couldn't afford extras. We couldn't afford buildings to go into buildings or whatever. It was very low budget. So just to solve it, we put a few years from now and went into a dystopian world. So we could shoot. We could shoot in empty back streets on the edges of town. We could go into buildings that were basically dilapidated. They gave it to us for nothing. And that inadvertently took the film into a contemporary and probably unlikely story within contemporary Melbourne at the time into allegory. And then despite all the trouble of making it and the kind of anguish, my best friend and Byron Kennedy, my partner's best friend from school, put money into it, and there was no other financing, and friends of theirs and so on, and I was desperate not to lose their money. Anyway, it succeeded internationally. In Japan, they said, "Oh, he's a samurai," and in Scandinavia, they said he's a lone Viking, and the French said they're westerns on wheels. And suddenly, I thought, okay, we tapped into some archetype that led me to Joseph Campbell and understanding, and I'm still doing it, not only trying to figure out how to tell stories, but why we tell stories. And just like the American Western from the silent movies were allegorical, so these films are. We took that into Mad Max 2, much more conscious of it, and even though that was a kind of a wilder production, I knew by then that we were on patrol in Vietnam and we were, had to get through it, and whatever happened, we had to adjust to everything. And so just bit by bit, I was asked to talk about to write something about Steven Spielberg. I was lucky enough to work with him to watch him on set way back when we did Twilight Zone movie. And I had this sense about him. You know the folk tale of Brer Rabbit and the briar patch? It felt like he was Brer Rabbit in the briar patch. He was completely at ease on a movie set. And I thought, God, this is his natural habitat. And it's taken me all this time to get close to that. And it's really interesting to understand why.
Well, between Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome and Fury Road, obviously you made other films in the interim, live action and animation, but what brought you back after 30 years? What could you not let go of that you had to return to this world?
The biggest thing, look, it's always driven by story. And an idea came to me is there's always a shift in anything we do, and particularly in cinema. And I realised that the audiences are we're speed reading the language of cinema now in a way. And I thought, what would it be like to tell a story in which all the exposition had to be told on the run? In other words, it's a continuous chase or a race. And then the idea was, what if the MacGuffin, so-called, was human? So it was the story of five wives being that sort of came to me as an idea. But the biggest thing by far, once that story was starting to form, was the difference in the technology. I was lucky enough to be there at the beginning of the digital dispensation, early 90s, with the movie Babe. We were Universal simply because they'd just done Jurassic Park. They understood what the technology could do. We could make the animals talk, and that drove Babe, the Babe films, and then Andrew Lesney, the cinematographer on Babe, went to shoot Lord of the Rings, early 2000s. He showed me the first motion capture of Gollum. I had no idea what motion capture was, but I realized that's how we could get the penguins to dance in the story we had of Happy Feet. And having done the animations, I suddenly realized this technology, the cameras are much more agile. Everything is much freer on every level of filmmaking. So to do that with an action film, doing things that we couldn't do 3 decades before or whatever it was very, very enticing. Again, always driven by story, but the tools as they're changing was very exciting to me. And that informed so much of what we did in Fury Road. Even the simplest things like erasing your tracks in the sand. And I remember reading about Lawrence of Arabia. They had camel tracks. And imagine you do a take, then what do you do with the sand? They bring helicopters in from the Jordanian army. That took a long time. And some guy figured out, some grip or something, figured out to kind of on a big bit of like a fishing rod, putting one of those powder puffs. You know, our mothers used to...
Makeup remover, yeah.
Yeah, the powder puffs, I think, and do that with the sand. Now, by the time you get to the desert in Namibia, and you do, a number of takes, you could just go over your tracks, keep the tracks that you want and need, and erase the others. So many things on so many levels, including safety. That was the big enticement for me doing. And then just to finish that the difference between the technology we used on Fury Road, not almost a decade ago, and what we did on Furiosa is again quite significant. I mean, we're in an ever-evolving process, and it's always been the same in cinema.
I want to talk about that in a second, but one thing I wanted to ask is, am I right in thinking that you wrote Furiosa before Fury Road? Is that correct? Or at the same time?
No. We wrote Fury Road first, but in order to inform Fury Road, we started to write the backstories of Furiosa and Max, because there's no way you could have even designed the film, just the physical design, costumes and cars and weapons, but or even the behavior, all the gestures, or the language and so on of the film, unless there was an underlying logic. And otherwise it would be too random. So we had to write some sort of document about the world and Furiosa's story and Max's story. And they eventually, because the film kept getting delayed, that Furiosa ended up as a screenplay. So by the time we started actually for real on Fury Road, we were able to give that to the cast and crew. And I remember indeed Charlize said when she read it, probably about 6 months before, read Furiosa, she said, "Can we shoot this one first?" and I said, "Charlize, we were planning this other film." No, we couldn't, of course. But so when Fury Road got traction, it felt that we should do it. I was, very engaged in the story, and what was interesting to me is that it was a different. It wasn't a repetition of Fury Road. The two films, as you saw, one butts directly into the next one, and that was that was interesting to me. One happens over 3 days and 2 nights. This is 18 years really, and that was a different rhythm.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but Fury Road wasn't so much written as drawn, or rather, like you worked with a long time with Brendan McCarthy, drawing the entire movie. Did you adopt a similar process with this?
No. Well, Fury Road was drawn, and then we had to write a screenplay for it to go to the studio and cast and crew, because storyboards, because they don't have the rhythm of time really implied into, you can't really judge it. So we wrote a screenplay, but it had illustrations and concept art in it, a bit like reading. I remember reading Baby Driver, and you sent me the script, which is I read on my iPad, and you had those little icons where you'd click on those little earphones, and as you were reading it, you were listening to the music that you eventually had in the movie. That's the sort of thing we just did visually. Anyway, to answer your question, that was all storyboarded, because that was by far the most accurate way we could convey the information of the shot. You could describe it, but it's much easier to illustrate it. Also on that film, we did a number of sequences with previs, fairly clumsy. Previs can be quite slow. This film was almost flipped. We certainly had storyboards, but with extended sequences, we used a system that Guy Norris, who's the second unit director, stunt coordinator, and we been working together for so long. And
the 21-year-old stuntman on The Road Warrior, yeah?
21-year-old stuntman on The Road Warrior, played about 3 roles. Now, he and his 2 sons developed this system called Proxy, which is basically using the Unreal Engine and the physics and so on, and to actually do basically map out the sequence in real time. You could design the vehicle, that chrome war rig, incredibly precisely. You could take every bike and every vehicle and every human. You could put in your cameras. We used the edge arm with the crane a lot. There were also a thing called TikTok, which was a sort of a crane system to get those guys who are flying in their parachutes and parasails and things like that. We could do all of that virtually and then use frames from that as storyboards. So on the call sheet you get the storyboards, and then then you had everything, the movement, a full simulation, not a simulation, but a full rendering of the scene. We called it, we modified it toy box. I didn't want to have the humans looking real, so they looked like little toy soldiers, still looking like their characters, so they were coloured a certain way. Because I didn't want to one of the things I say to storyboard artists, I don't want to see performance on the faces. But one great storyboard artist I work with, Mark Sexton, can't help himself, and because he does a lot of comics, and I'll never forget. There was a shot he drew in Fury Road of Furiosa, and I realised that Charlize based her performance on what he had drawn. It's one shot, just her looking over her arm, as if and I said to him, please don't do it on this because it's already preempting the work of the actor. So I made sure that all the characters in this were still like little coloured plastic soldiers, specifically for that. But if you wanted to do something much more, much more real, you could do it. Anyway, that was the big difference on this film. And we did all the big sequences and even blocking some of the more static scenes simply because we could do it. It was a kind of pre-vis that then goes into post-vis, which basically sets up all the visual effects that you need to do. So again, that tool wasn't available 10 years ago.
We'll talk about let's just take the stowaway sequence in the middle of the film, just as an example. Even with that previs tool, like when you're sitting around doing that, like one of the things about the way you direct is that like the choice of the angles is always perfect. There's nothing really repeated. there's no real sort of coverage in the sense of some like action directors might shoot something with 7 cameras and just hose it down and then cut it together. But you're incredibly specific and meticulous. So even before you get onto the set, how long does that take for you and Guy, and I'm not sure, maybe your VFX, who would be part of that team, and how long would it take to work out the angles for that stowaway sequence?
That happens in the process of doing the proxy or the toy box thing that we called it. Look, I just on this any action sequence, the first thing is it's got to be character driven. That's obvious. Otherwise, it's just surface. You're looking at the dramaturgy exactly as you would do a dialogue sequence or something else. The second thing is it's a kind of, there's no question, it's a kind of visual music. And in the same way that music, there's a strong causal relationship between one note or one chord and the next. I believe it's the same with cinema, and particularly kinetic sequences, as with the faster rhythm. So that's got to be built into the design of the film. We can do it today. You can't, once you had to write it, and you can't describe that, and you can't even really indicate it on storyboards. But now you can do that. So that's the first thing. So putting that together was really, really key. Connecting each one moment to the next, and once you do that, and that's done. To be honest, that's explored while we're putting it together, knowing what the story is, knowing what you do. I think we did some rough storyboards, knowing and concept art on the way, but you're building the sequence to a point where you've got enough information for everybody to know exactly what's happening, and there are a lot of people involved in that stuff. Not the least safety people, all the rigging. Every single person has got harnesses on, and there's of course there's scaffolding and things that mobile scaffolding that you can erase it. You erase it in post and things like that. So that's a way. And the other thing that happened in this film, for instance, with that war rig, is we thought, look, we need something else. So as we're doing the previs, we decided to use those claws, those hydraulic claws, and stuff, because they become so it's much more it's much more plastic, and you're evolving. And plus, I've got a strong visual imagination, but I could never in my mind keep all those spatial dynamics in my head unless we had a tool. For instance, we were under the war rig, we were on top of the war rig, in front of the back, and we were in the airspace around it. And you could imagine the shots, but to see how the one shot flowed into the next, you could do it, but you couldn't hold the whole sequence in your head. And then as you're putting together in a way that's readable, then you can say, then you see the opportunity for something else. So it's almost like going out and improvising a sequence, but you're doing it virtually, and then you're making those adjustments. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I mean, at what point? Because obviously you work with your wife, Margaret Sixel, who's your editor. Did she get involved at that point, or did she come in when you shot the footage?
No, she gets involved way after we shot. She doesn't, both on Fury Road and this, she sort of glanced at the screenplay, but when she's in the cutting room, she's putting aside all the aspirations, what we intended to shoot, everything, and just judges each shot and each frame basically on its merits, regardless of what I wanted it to be. Or whatever she will, which is really great, because she's seeing it fresh. Yeah.
But that's great. I mean, because it's something that's, I mean, it's interesting that you say you can't understand the geography of it, because I think you're the director who is the best at spatial geography in action and in drama. It's just incredible. And so it's interesting to me that you say that, because I would say that that's the thing that I take away from it. I mean, one other thing, I mean, we're going to unfortunately have to wrap up soon, but like, I want to just ask a couple more things. Just talk to me about, when I'm watching a film like that, I have no sort of concept at some point what is there and what isn't. What is location? What is sets? Like, especially like in the bullet farm, in that quarry, I was really trying to figure out what I'm actually looking at. So what is that process, and who are you? You're sitting down with your production designer and your VFX person to sort of figure out how to extend a sequence like that. Say with that one specific location, what exactly are we looking at?
You're looking, first of all, the location actually, a location very similar to it exists way in the centre of Australia. There's a gold mine that looks very, very similar to that. And I work with a wonderful production designer, Colin Gibson, who wants to do everything real. That gold mine is in a very remote location, has about accommodation for about 100 people working on the mine, and it's got all the equipment and so on. The shooting crew on this film was 1,200 people. so to do that, and Colin say, no, we got to go out there. We go out there. We'd still be there. I really believe we would. So what we did is we basically took most of the shape of particularly the main road where that was at the mine where the truck and everything sort of happened, where the war rig and where everything happens, and we took that and we reproduced the key moments on a location much closer to Sydney, where we were free to sort of really do earthworks and so on, built the big portcullis, added things that weren't available in the mine. We had to, where they were kind of what we call the favelas, those where people stayed. You had a sense that there were places where the people who worked at Bullet Farm were, there was sort of accommodation around the walls of it. We built, the tiers were there in the original mine, but we added some, the various terraces, the buildings. For instance, there was a thing we called a conveyor belt, a big some sort of conveyor belt, which is that big arm that catches the war rig. That existed at the mine. There were lots of excavators and things like that. That existed there, but we actually got them in location much closer to Sydney. So and then we did. What we couldn't do in the mine, we created digitally. So it's definitely a mixture of real. Look, there's the big things with these films, which in which we don't defy the laws of physics. There's no people flying or vehicles flying, and so you have to have what's essentially where you predict the eye scan of the audience will be, which I think you can shot by shot. You know where the majority of the eyes are going to be scanning. You've got to make sure that that's real. And the rest you can build around it. So, when you see Dementus ride into a storm, that's Chris Hemsworth riding into a storm. But all that, all that dust storm and stuff that he rides into has to be created digitally. You could do it, with massive wind machines and so on, but you wouldn't get the result that you're looking for. So it's a mixture of two.
Two quick questions to wrap up, one from me and one from somebody else. Fury Road and Furiosa, I think, can both be described as pure cinema, but what does that phrase mean to you?
Oh, look, I started, I got into film simply by I used to do I used to draw and paint a lot. That was my interest, and I got in, and then I became interested in cinema, and I read Kevin Brownlow's book, The Parade's Gone By. Had a big effect on me. He basically said all the syntax of cinema. Cinema is just 130 years old, and a brand new language that is now global. It's a universal language, and the language was invented by the silent filmmakers in Europe and basically America. My understanding, and others might know better, I remember reading once that when people first saw a close-up of a head turning, they screamed because they thought it was a disembodied head. And that language is read by little kids before they read in their own language. Anyway, so I went into the cinema of Buster Keaton, Harold Lloyd, and I really, for me, I realised that Kevin Brownlow was right. When sound came along, as we all know, things slowed down a lot, and then the equipment and everything got more agile during the next decades. And now we're at a point now with digital cameras. There is an argument, depending on the film, for shooting celluloid, but having shot, for a long time on celluloid, it's such an antiquated system by and large. Even for instance, I'm off the track, but
I don't care.
But I remember on the first Mad Max, we had an explosion, and we had I think 2 cameras on it, and we wanted to shoot the explosion. I think we wanted to shoot at 96 frames or even 48 frames. To put the mag on, load it up, 2,000-foot reels. And then for somebody to actually start the camera and then be driven out, you used half of the 2,000 feet just in that moment. And if anything happened or it was delayed, you'd have the explosion and you've run out of film. Now the chips, at least 45 minutes. You can start the camera, you can get everyone out. Just on that simple, and you'd never make the sort of films that you could. I'm in utter wonder of how great cinema was done. In those days, the time it would take to do it, and to do it for real, just is quite extraordinary to me. Anyway, so what was the question?
I think you answered it. Yeah. What is pure cinema?
Oh yeah, pure. There's no question to me. And look, I remember hearing Roman Polanski say there's only one perfect place for the camera at any given moment. And having done animation, I was able to do that in practice. I saw that was the case, and I'll give you I'll try to make this quick. If you saw Happy Feet, you meet the mother and you meet the father. You meet the mother and father, and then you meet the egg, and then the little penguin comes out, and the family is together. That's the opening stanza, if you like, of the movie. Then we cut to originally we cut to a school teacher who's teaching all the little penguins, and when we watched the film, and it was all lensed, it was fully performed, the voices and pretty good rendering of what it would look like, and suddenly I realized that I made a real mistake. The audience had no idea where the film, who were the key characters, because we meet mother, father, little penguin, and a school teacher. There's no direction there. So we without changing anything except the camera, we re-lens the sequence where instead of seeing the school teacher, we see the little penguin go to school. We follow the penguin into school and we tell the story. At that moment, the audience knows purely by the point of view of the camera that this is the story of a little penguin. We set up the story. And I tell you, had we not done that, the film would have lost all its rhythm. It would be another 10 minutes before you realize, this is the guy we're following. So Polanski was right, and the next film I was doing was Fury Road. It was real, and for a while there I thought, gee, I've really got to be thinking really, really carefully as to where the camera's got to be at any moment, and so. Anyway, that's what I mean by pure cinema, I guess.
Well, funny enough, my last question has already just been answered because this is from our mutual friend, Anya Taylor-Joy, and her question was, what informed Furiosa that you learned while making Happy Feet? So she was like way ahead of us. That was really her question. You literally just answered it. Yeah. Well, I think we have to wrap up there. Not just for tonight, not just for this film, but let's thank George Miller for 45 years of incredible cinema.
Thank you. Thank you. Very kind. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to another DGA Q&A. The Director's Cut is available wherever you listen to podcasts. And please share, subscribe, rate, and review. We'd love to hear your feedback, and you can help fellow film buffs find the show. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time. This podcast is produced by the Directors Guild of America.